My name is Joseph Callahan. I'm the interviewer today, and we're interviewing Naval Reserve veteran Shirley Virginia Kelley, who became Shirley Virginia Belmure when she married. But we're going to call Shirley Virginia Kelley Virginia because she and her mother had the same first name, and to avoid confusion, everyone called her Virginia, and she goes by Virginia today. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, in the room today, and first of all, the date is March 16th, 2018. We have in the room Mark Clark, who's our technician running the camera. And we have, or at the location of KGEM TV television studio in Monrovia, California. This project is for the Library of Congress Veteran History Project, and it's being done through the Monrovia Public Library. We have Naval Reserve veteran who served during World War II. And tell us a little bit, Virginia, about where you were born and growing up.
I was born in the state of Vermont in northeastern United States, where in the winters it was extremely cold. In the summers it was beautiful and had low mountains and lots of streams. I would go fishing with my brothers and my sister.
Yes. Now you were born in Greenfield, Massachusetts, right?
I was born in Greenfield, Massachusetts, where my dad worked on a tobacco plantation, of all things.
Yes. Now I have your birth date as December 5, 1923, which
correct.
makes you 94 years young. And you look marvelous.
I'm sorry, but I right now I feel 94 years old.
Well, you look fantastic. Now, your father worked on a tobacco plantation, and that was until the Depression, I assume, and then he changed jobs. Tell us a little bit about your father.
He was an extremely intelligent, fascinating man. When he was 10 years old, with his class in a little one-room schoolhouse in New Hampshire, he went to visit a woolen mill where the wool from the sheep had been sheared and it was put on a conveyor belt and ran up through into the ceiling to the room above to be processed. And he put his hand, his right hand, into the conveyor belt to pull out a stick that was caught in some of the wool. And the stick caught his hand at the same time, pulled him through the conveyor belt up to the top of the ceiling and cut off his arm. Mm. So above his right elbow, his arm was cut off, and the only way he was kept from bleeding to death was that the wool plugged up the arteries in his upper right arm and shoulder and saved his life.
Right. Now, despite the fact that he lost, how old was he when this accident happened, do you recall?
When he was 10 years old.
Very young, and despite the fact that he had one arm, he was a successful mechanic.
Extremely, extremely. He said, and he drove for the WPA in the early 30s. He drove all over the state many, many times working with people. And he said to me once he thought he had driven probably about 1 million miles in his life, which was extremely rare for a man who had only one arm and half of another.
Now, your parents were both well educated. Both your parents
yes, they
had
were both
college degrees.
Graduates.
Your father then was hired by the WPA. What was he hired to do?
To go into different homes and buildings and factories and talk with the people about vegetable gardening for people before the war, when everyone was so poor, and during the Depression.
Right. And the WPA was one of those
the Works
programs
Progress Association.
Yeah, during the Great Depression. Now, you also have history with your mother's side of the family. Your mother had the same first name as you, Shirley. Tell us a little bit. I understand that her family came over on the Mayflower.
They came over on the Mayflower in 1620 from England and landed in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And she was from the family of Whitney. So she had a fourth cousin, I think, several times removed,
Yes.
who was Eli Whitney, who invented the cotton gin.
Yes.
And that was quite an interesting episode, I guess.
Yes. All right. So you in relationship to your siblings, you have an older sister,
Yes,
and your older sister's name was
Barbara.
Barbara?
yes.
Now, during the war, I understand she raised pigs. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. As a matter of fact, I forgot about that.
And she raised pigs. That would be part of kind of like what your
She
father
lived
did.
on a
It's like,
farm
yeah, helping
outside
to
of
supply
a
food.
town in Vermont, outside of Montpelier, which is the capital of the state.
Yes.
And she was a pig farmer. She was, in her early 20s, I guess, at that
Right.
time.
She's still alive. She's a year
She's
older
a year
than you.
older than I am now. Very active, very smart, very positive all the time. I talk with her frequently, and she is very supportive of me and my problems.
And you have two brothers. There's Harmon Kelley Jr., named after your father, who was a contractor home builder. He served in the Army during World War II.
Yes, he did, and he is now dead.
All right.
He would
And
be over 100, I think.
and Norman Kelley.
And Norman was my other brother who was in Burma during the war. And at one time he said that he had to, in self-defense, kill a Chinese soldier. And he'd never gotten over it. It bothered him terribly.
Bothered him.
And he's now deceased, too.
And then you have a brother named Judson.
Yes,
Now Judson must be the youngest. Is he the youngest?
he is. He's 7 years younger than I am, and he's in his late 80s. Very brilliant, but is sort of in a retirement center and
I
not
see.
doing very much.
Now he's a retired postal worker, isn't he? Or at
Yes,
least he
that's
was
correct.
A
He
postal
was a
worker.
postal worker for many, many years.
And he served in the Navy, but not until after the war, like in between World War
That's
II
true. That's
and
true.
Korea. So he served in the Navy for a period of time. So you have a very supportive family of the U.S. Armed Forces.
Yes, that's
the
correct.
entire family. I mean, and trying to do good to help our nation during, starting with the Great Depression, great and troubling times that people like your family stepped up, and as you did. So now we get to the part where you tell us about what you did before you enlisted in the Navy. You worked
I
for
worked
General
at the
Electric.
General Electric Company in Massachusetts, helping build little blades that fitted into turbines that powered the ships for the war.
I see.
And I found out that by joining the service, I would be able to go to college on the GI Bill.
I see.
And because both my parents were college graduates and I enjoyed learning anyway, I wanted to go to college.
Absolutely, and it costs quite a bit to go to college. The GI Bill is fantastic.
Right.
And probably the very best one was during World War II, where you served and the government provided you with educational benefits, as well as many other benefits. Now, you heard about the great educational benefits with the Navy and went, I'm in. So you went and enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserves, the Women's Reserves. So you were going to become a WAVE, which WAVE stands for Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service, which during World War II, this was created by the Presidential Act to allow women to take positions so that men could be released to go into combat. You signed up because
I wanted to go to college.
You wanted to go to college on the GI
on
Bill.
the GI Bill.
And you reported on 28 December 1944. And that was a very cold winter. So you were sent to Bronx, New York, to a naval recruiting station called USS Hunter. It was called that because the Hunter College campus was used, and literally the government sent everybody who lived there elsewhere so that women like yourself could be trained there. Tell us about your training at USS Hunter there in the Bronx.
The most I can remember about it is marching from the barracks to the mess hall and then to the buildings where we took our courses. and we would start at 5:30 in the morning, and it was sleeting, freezing cold. And our mess sergeant was a Texan, a tall girl, and very abrupt and sharp, and very, very capable. And she would hop march, you know, and while we tried to stop from freezing. But I've never forgotten her.
So at least keeping you moving kept you warm.
It's true.
You finished your basic training. You went on and got some advanced training. We don't really know the details, but there's a photograph of you, which is going to be added to this, as well as the marching parade from USS Hunter. And there's a photograph of you when you were in basic training there at the USS Hunter. You got orders to Pensacola, Florida. Nice and warm. You went from being freezing to being nice and warm in Pensacola. Tell us about when you first reported to the U.S. Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida.
I was sent to Pensacola to become a mechanic, a riveter on the PBYs that were stationed there. They were patrol bombers, twin engine, and they had been shot down over the Pacific when they were trying to land in the water and pick up American pilots who had been shot down by the Japanese.
Yes.
And they were sent on over to Pensacola for complete refurbishment. And because I was small and the only girl, I think, in that part of the department, I would crawl into the wings through the struts and back up the rivets that the riveters would patch holes from the bullets. And that was my main job. And I enjoyed it immensely.
So you were small, so you crawled around inside, you backed up the rivets, and someone would be riveting on the outside. You enjoyed that work, didn't you?
Indeed. I'm mechanically oriented anyway.
Yes. Now, your father was mechanically oriented, and he had only one arm. Now, your brothers, they were like home builders. You have a brother who is a postal worker, but he also served in the Navy. And you yourself are very handy around the house. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed.
Like, what kind of projects have you taken on? You know, what kind of things are you willing to take on yourself? Do you do some plumbing, some carpentry work?
Do you mean now or
now and throughout the years?
Throughout the years, I have built houses and put on roofs and cut down trees and done a lot of manual work because I'm very active in that area and enjoy it immensely.
It explains a lot about why you're physically fit. For 94, you're doing very well. Now, you entered the Navy as a seaman, and you finished after less than 2 years of service as an aviation metalsmith 3rd class. So you advanced pretty well to 3rd class petty officer in the Navy. Do you remember what happened when the war ended? Like, you were at Pensacola, I assume, because that would have happened while you were there. Do you remember when the war had actually ended?
Yes, I do. I remember when President Roosevelt died. I think in 1943, I was walking up the street of Pensacola and I heard it on a loudspeaker. And I also remember when the war was over.
A lot of celebrations, partying?
Well, no, not a lot, because we were really very so deeply involved, I guess, in fighting the war that it was hard to let it go.
Yes.
And to celebrate.
Now, you had a wonderful base there. It was about 400 women, I understand, at
650.
600 women. And you were surrounded by how many men?
30,000. We had 7 bases of men in the area.
Now, despite the fact that there were so many men around you, you had a private beach. It was for women only.
We had our own mess hall. We had our own hospital.
Yes.
It really was a very exhilarating, exciting time, and I had a wonderful time.
You did, yes. You would do it all again today if you could, wouldn't you?
I think I'm too old now.
Well, that's why I said if you could, you would do it
If
all
I
again.
could.
Yes. All right, so now you've also, which is something interesting, that I have your military service documents, DD 214 here, and it was not updated until 1954. And in 1954, they corrected the amount of time you were on active duty to 1 year, 7 months, 22 days. And they also listed the 2 medals that you received, which I assume until you got this, you weren't even aware that you had been awarded 2 medals.
I've never received them, and I really, at this point, it's sort of past the...
Well, we're going to see I know your daughter Renee has already applied for them.
That's
So
a
for
surprise to
the
me.
benefit of those watching this video, you received the American Area Campaign Medal, and to clarify things for those who are watching this, there was combat going on off the coast of the United States. We had German submarines, we had Japanese bombs coming in by balloon. There was a lot of activity going on the U.S. coast, and so it was definitely a campaign area, very active in World War II. And you were actually repairing aircraft that were coming back after being damaged so that they could return to combat.
True.
As well as those same type of planes were used to rescue pilots off the U.S. coast and to bomb German submarines off the U.S. coast. So PBY was a very important aircraft. And you also received the World War II Victory Medal, because all people in active duty at the time of the war ended received that. So congratulations and thank you. Thank you for your service. Now, before you got out of the Navy, I understand a PBY was needed for a movie on the West Coast. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got
That's
there.
right. I think I had gotten out of the Navy, but I was still there in Pensacola.
Yes.
So it was shortly after I got out. MGM, the movie studios in Hollywood, were looking for a PBY because they wanted to make a movie with Van Johnson and June Allyson about a PBY and the experience that the doctor and the nurse, quote unquote, had in this ship. So instead of getting one locally, they couldn't find one locally.
Yes.
They got one in Pensacola. They bought it.
Oh, they bought the plane.
They bought the plane and had a crew fly it back to Hollywood to make the film. And so I thought I would, because I had just gotten out of the Navy, I thought I would join the crew.
Yes.
Which I did.
And you enjoyed the West Coast. You got to find out what the lovely weather was out in California.
And that's why I'm here now.
Yeah. You told me a very interesting story when you went to get on the train to go back home. Who got off the train when you were getting off? Was it Elizabeth?
Elizabeth Taylor.
And she was impressed to meet you, wasn't she?
I don't think she ever knew me at all. Yeah, that's right. She did get off the train in Pasadena.
Was it a Super Chief? Was that the name of it?
Probably,
went across country?
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the train ride, because people today are used to just getting on a jet plane and then you're on the other coast in hours. What was a train ride from Los Angeles to New York like back then?
I don't remember.
Well, you were on it for over a week, I would assume.
I don't remember. Honestly, Joe, I don't remember.
Okay. All right, so then you went back home. Okay, you got discharged from the Navy. You went back home. How were you treated by people when you got back home? Do you recall from interaction?
Well, I wasn't the only one who had been in the war. There were a lot of veterans,
Yes.
and so that it didn't make me that unique. I immediately went to college, junior college for 2 years there in Montpelier, where I lived, and
Yes.
then met my future husband.
That's an interesting story. Where did you meet your husband?
Well, Montpelier is a very small town. Even though it's the capital of the state, there's about 9,000 people in it. And I ran into him literally, physically, in the street corner. And we started dating, and then finally he wanted to become an actor and go to the Pasadena Playhouse. So we rented a car, got in the car and took off and drove across the United States.
Yes. You probably don't recall how long it took to cross the country, but do you remember any interesting things that happened along the way?
No, not very many. I remember staying at a bed and breakfast in New Jersey one night, and that's about all I remember.
Yes. A very different time. There were no freeways back then.
That's right.
So you took maybe Route 66, but that would have been about the biggest expressway across country, and
that's right.
Ran from Chicago to Los Angeles.
Right. Right.
Well, after the war, your husband came and you came to the West Coast, but you stayed in touch with, I think her name was Chickie from Pensacola.
Oh, yes.
Tell us a little bit about her and your
She was
communication.
my very good friend, and she was in on the top bunk.
She was tall, wasn't she?
Because she was 6 feet tall. And a wonderful girl. I really was so fond of her, and we had a great time. And she didn't have to use the stepladder to get in her bunk. She just climbed up on the top.
She was tall.
And I kept in touch with her for several years, but she is now dead. And she lived, I think, in New Jersey. So we didn't actually see each other after the war, but we just kept in touch by mail.
That was great.
And she was one of my very close friends.
Yeah. Good friendship you developed during your time
Oh,
in the
indeed,
service.
indeed.
Yes. Okay, so now you're in California, and your husband is struggling to become an actor, and you went back to college, didn't you?
Yes.
Tell us each college that you went to in Los Angeles and the degree that you completed, if you would.
I went to PCC, Pasadena City College, which is a 2-year college, I think for 1 year. Then I went to Occidental,
Yes.
over in Eagle Rock. Incidentally, I just got a newsletter from them, so I'm still on their mailing list. And this was in the 1940s, I think.
And then, okay, so you went through Occidental College, and you completed your degree there. Then you went on.
No, and then I went to Pacific Oaks.
Oh, that's right. You went to Pacific Coast.
Pacific Oaks, which is was a Quaker college.
Oh, that's where you came in contact with the Quakers while you were there.
That's one of the times, yes.
Yes. And as all of this went on, you still had children. You had children as you were in college, or was that a little later?
I had children. Oh, let's see.
You had Steve.
When we first came to Pasadena,
Yes.
Steve was born. He would now be 67, but he had cancer, and it was terminal.
Now, he was a carpenter, so again, keeping up the tradition in the family of being good with your hands. I mean, it's just passed right down to another generation. He was a carpenter.
He was also a herpetologist.
Okay. And then there was Greg. Greg was a mechanic, and he worked on race cars, I understand.
Greg is still around, very active, and he drives and builds and drives race cars.
I see.
And he now has a son who drives race cars, too.
Oh, okay. And then you have your daughter, Renee.
Correct.
Renee is a licensed clinical social worker who happens to be quite good with her hands as well. So she does a lot of repair work around the house.
Right.
She's very handy to have around. So you had 3 children?
Correct.
Yes. And so you really kind of, because after you went to Occidental College, you completed your BA at Whittier College and your MA at Pacific Oaks College in Pasadena. You went to work, well, first of all, you worked as a secretary. Tell us.
That's correct.
Mr. and Mrs. Mills, I believe, is the name. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit about what you did with them and
She was a violin teacher. They lived in Altadena. She was a violin teacher. He was a piano teacher.
Oh.
And because she was working with violin students who were very young, 2 and 3 and 4 years old,
Yes.
with what's called the Suzuki method of learning to play the violin.
Now I understand that Dr. Suzuki, he believed that you take a very young child and you put a violin in their hands and teach them to use it, and they become gifted at playing
That's
the
right.
violin. And how did you come to go to Japan? Did you go with the Mr.
I went
and
with the
Mrs.
Mills as their secretary.
I see.
And we went to his, what is called a kaikon, which was his kindergarten. And he had 63 children there, preschoolers, with one teacher. And it was amazing how she could control them with love and care and not be harsh at all.
Yes.
But she did that, and it was a wonderful program. But he also was at the time teaching these little toddlers the violin.
Yes.
And so we visited them for a month. Then I came back to the United States.
But you were over there for about a year, weren't you?
No,
oh,
I was only there a month.
Okay.
Right.
And you came back to the United States, and I understand that you became, was the director of a school here?
Right.
Tell us a little bit about that, please.
Well, because I had worked with young children in several capacities, I became the director of the Caltech, which is the California Institute of Technology in Pasadena.
Yes.
I became the director of their preschool,
Okay.
and they had about 125 children there.
Now, was this a preschool for staff, or was it for
Both,
staff and
both,
students?
Both. Staff and students and anybody else who could find an opening.
How many employees, do you recall how many employees worked at that school?
You mean at the preschool?
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
You must have had quite a few people there.
Yeah, maybe a dozen or so.
Virginia, you worked for 22 years at this, as director of this school, this nursery at Caltech, right?
That's correct.
And so at the age of 77, you retired. Isn't that correct?
Did you say I was tired or
You
I
retired.
retired?
Retired, yes. Well, I'm tired, retired, yes.
I
Tired,
retired. Yes, I did at age 77.
So you've been retired for 17 years.
It doesn't seem that long.
It doesn't? No.
No.
You live in Altadena today.
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
And part of your lifestyle now in retirement is you do yard work, gardening.
Gardening.
Tell us a little bit about your
of
typical day.
My typical day?
Yes.
I have what I call a digger. I'm not sure what it is. It's about yo long with a blade on it like this.
Yes.
It's not a sickle or a scythe, but I scratch in the dirt in the ground, and it digs up the weeds.
Yes.
And there are lots of weeds there.
Yes.
And I
So you
don't-
go to war on the weeds.
Indeed, indeed I do, and I enjoy it immensely. Maybe it's the satisfaction of getting something done in my old age.
Well, there's just a few questions that I have left for you, so this will be real close to the end. How would you say your wartime experience has affected the rest of your life?
The rest of my life?
Yes, because for example, you got a college education because of it. And what other things happened? Do you think you met your husband because of that?
No. Well, it was pure coincidence that I met him on the street corner, even though we lived in the same town. I can't equate that with my wartime experience at
And
all.
probably then the fact that you met your husband is really the reason you came to the West Coast.
It is exactly the only reason.
But you did complete your college education on the West
Yes,
Coast.
I did.
And
I
the
was-
colleges are all very close to where you lived at the time, so you
I
were
was
able
determined
to
to.
utilize the GI Bill and complete your education.
Correct.
And it led to you meeting Dr. Suzuki and having this wonderful experience.
I've had, I feel, a very fruitful life, filled with many experiences, and many of those are my own doing.
Yes.
And I'm willing to admit that and say that I have led this life because I wanted to. I was determined to get the best out of my life that I could.
Now, is that something that you learned from your military experience? That, was that like, would you say, a life lesson? Is take advantage of what's given to you? or take advantage and take
No, it
what
was.
you
I
needed?
think it was. I learned it from my parents.
Yes, your parents motivated all of your family to do their very best. I
Yes,
got that
exactly.
from,
because they were involved in the First World War, and
oh, yes. So, and then how has your military service during World War II impacted you and your thoughts about what you did during World War II, specifically that time?
I think what I did during World War II was not only enjoy life, which I did, but contribute something, which we as human beings should all try to contribute something in our lives to make the world better,
Yes. Yes.
which is very difficult to do now.
What message would you leave for women like yourself about serving in the military? What would you say to a girl who came up to you today and said, you know, you were in the Navy, what do you think? Would you recommend it for me?
Definitely.
And would you give me your number one reason why you think it's something you would recommend?
Because it teaches discipline, self-discipline, a need to always try and make yourself a better person and contribute better things in your life, in our lives, in the lives of the world. We're in a bad situation right now.
And so, do you have any final thoughts you want to share with the people who are viewing this? Because we're getting close to the end of this now. What do you think of this project?
I'm surprised and pleased. I'm amazed. I think it's a wonderful project. I don't know who came up with the idea, but I just think it should be able to contribute a great deal to the youth in our society.
Great. Thank you very much for being interviewed today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again for your service. It's a wonderful thing meeting you, and I look forward to hearing more about your adventures.
May I shake your hand?
Yes, you may.